because you will have to know both the FIFO and the weighted average method. But you know what? We're going to have the weighted average method down, because when you take cost accounting, and you could talk to Jacob about it, when you cost, have you spoken to Jacob this semester, Greg?
Well, I reintroduced myself at the beginning of the semester, and
Oh, he forgot about you.
I sent him some material to get some feedback, but he didn't respond. But
Oh,
the last that I heard, he was sick, so I wasn't
yeah,
sure.
he had the COVID-19. He
Yeah,
had the 19. Who knows what version we'll get? Will we get the 20? Was it called COVID-19 because it was discovered in 2019? Now there's a new variant of it, right? So is it going to be COVID 21?
I think there's a couple of variants.
Oh, there are. Might be, it could be COVID 21A, COVID 21B, and COVID 21C. Which strain did you get? So do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
I
understand.
can't cover everything. I can't cover but I'm going to cover what, you'll be in good shape when you go to cost accounting. And ask Jacob what it was like taking cost accounting again. I mean, he took managerial accounting, but when he took cost accounting at the big U at NAU, guess what? 90% of what we covered, boom, was in that class. So it was like a review for him. Yes. All right. So trust me on that. So we will master weighted average. And there's 4 steps involved. First is to determine. So write in your notes. I got to be able to determine the equivalent units. Equivalent units. You got to make that calculation. You got to calculate the equivalent units for direct materials and then conversion cost. I just abbreviate CC for conversion cost, which I know consists of direct labor and manufacturing overhead, because I remember chapter 1. I remember the definition of conversion cost. And it was good to see Deshante knew it. And he might have knew that, hey, I got to know that in the future. Maybe he just knew somehow. All right. So step 1, determine the equivalent units. Step 2, you got to determine the cost. Determine the cost per equivalent unit. Oh, I see. Because in part 2, you figure out what was the cost that we had in the beginning working process, what were the costs added this time period, and then you know the total cost. If you know the equivalent units, you divide the equivalent units into the direct material cost for the time period, and then you'll have different equivalent units for conversion costs that you have to divide. And then you get the cost per equivalent unit for direct materials and for conversion cost. The equivalent units per unit. So this would be direct material costs per equivalent unit. This would be conversion costs per equivalent unit. You got that? That's halfway through the production report. Number 3, you got to determine the costs that were transferred to the next department or to finished goods. Oh, that would be important. Transfer to the next department. If it's completed, then it would be transferred to finished goods inventory. This would be transferred from one work in process, Department A, to Department B, or whatever they call their departments. You got to figure out Number three, you got to determine what costs were transferred to the next department, the next work in process account or finished goods account. And then also you have to determine the cost in ending work in process. So that's a two-step process for step three. 1, 2, 3. 1, determine the equivalent units. 2, determine the cost per equivalent unit for both direct material costs and conversion costs. 3, determine what the total cost of the goods transferred to the next department or transferred to finished goods. And then you also have to determine what is the cost left behind in ending work in process. That's going to show up on the balance sheet in the ending work in process. Work in process, that ending balance is going to show up on the balance sheet. And then 4, we seem to have this a lot. We have to reconcile the cost that you had in the beginning WIP in the beginning work in process plus costs added during this time period. That has to balance with cost transferred to the next department or finished goods, depending. And then you have to determine the costs in ending work in process. Wow. So let's look at all this. That's a lot. It's a lot. Look, I can't even get it on one sheet so you can see it. Let's review. Determine the equivalent units per direct material cost and conversion cost. So we're just determining the number of equivalent units if they could have done 1 unit at a time, but they did it in batches. So they got 40,000 units that has 60% of the direct material costs and only say, and maybe it has 80% of the conversion costs. Well, then you got to take those percentages and multiply it by the units in ending work in process. You got it? And so once we get the equivalent units in part 1, part 2, we have to determine the cost per equivalent unit. So you need what's the total cost from last time period, that would be in the beginning work in process, and what costs were added. That would be what direct material costs were added, what direct labor, what manufacturing overhead costs. And step 3, we got to determine what the ending work in process, the total cost for those units that are partially completed. And then we got to look at, of the units transferred out, what's that cost? Why do we have to get these numbers? Well, because we're going to have to debit work in process for the next department or finished goods, whatever that cost is. And we have to credit the work in process for department, whatever it is. I see. Yes. And then, so we figured equivalent units, cost per equivalent unit, determining the total cost of goods transferred to the next department or to finished goods. And the second part, we got to figure out the cost of the equivalent of the ending work in process. And then the last step is to reconcile it. So we have these costs. Oh, those costs are going to fall in the second half. Cost that were transferred out to the next department and an ending work in process. And then that has to equal, this has to check with this cost from the beginning work in process plus cost added during this time period. So that's a rough outline of the whole process. I didn't go through the nitty gritty step by step of everything, but you need to know the overall view. What's the whole purpose of doing this production report? Well, you got to know what your ending work in process inventory is, because at the end of the year, you got to report that on the balance sheet, that inventory account. You're transferring costs from one department to the next. You got to know what that work in process for that department costs are. Or if you're transferring it to finished goods, you got to know what the goods are costing you. You put it into finished goods. What's the next step? You sell goods, and you got to match the cost of that finished good with the sales revenue. You follow me? Okay. So, any questions before we get into an example? I want you to review that chapter quickly. Do you notice journal entries are the exact same thing, except they got more than one work in process account? That's the only difference. So it's not going to matter on the exam if I make you do a job order costing or a process costing journal entry problem. Am I right? What's the only difference, Greg, again?
Has more work in process accounts.
Yes, you have multiple work in process accounts. All right. Questions for any of you out there? I've been doing all the talking and it's not good. Go ahead, Clarissa. Go ahead and tell me something. Tell me something that you're not quite sure on that. Oh, that's beautiful. Go ahead. Could you say that again? Oh, that wasn't you. That was somebody making noise somehow, like scissors going. I don't know what it was. Did you hear that, Cherie? Vanessa's laughing. She was the one probably making that noise. I see there's a jungle. You're in front of a jungle, I see. Look at that jungle you're in. You must be like in the Amazon or something, and you're able to zoom your class. You're on vacation. That maybe you're in Africa on a safari. I can see it now. You're about ready to load up on the elephant, and you're going to go into the safari, go looking for the big cats. Is that what you're bagging today? Or are you going after a rhino? Yes, that's right. I saw your trophy room. Huge. Yes. I had one of my former wrestlers. He got into big game hunting. He got a degree in engineering. He went to work for this large corporation, Sunt, and they manufactured all kinds of structures. And one of his jobs, he had to go off the coast of Africa. It was on an island that the United States owned, and he had to build an army base. That was top secret kinds of stuff. And then when he first got out of school, he started his job in Tucson, and he built the tallest building in Tucson. That was his first project. Now he retired from them, and he's just kind of developing, building houses. No big deal. It's easy for him. And he also builds storage units. That's pretty good. All right. Is that me doodling or is that somebody else doodling? Maybe that's what that noise was. There's some kind of instrument that cut through my desktop. Wait a second. Those markings are above the desk. Let's see, my hand's underneath the markings. If I go up, oh, the markings still are higher, higher. How high do I have to go? Oh, man. Somebody scratched the heck out of the camera, maybe. That's what it was. I don't know how you do that. Yes.
Clarissa has a question. She says she doesn't know why her mic's not working.
Her mic's not working? More technological problems. Maybe she needs to unmute. You unmuted yourself so you could speak to me, correct?
Yeah.
Maybe she would try that. And what did she say in the chat?
She said, doesn't matter for step 3 if we do ending work in process first or the cost of the units that were transferred.
Who says that?
Clarissa.
Well, she's right. She knows some things. So she's covering something up there, blue over white. I don't know what's behind that. A light maybe, right? Oh, now she knows what I'm talking about. So could it be like I can control my volume? Can you control your volume? You can turn it, you can mute yourself, you can turn it up, you can turn it down. You can go into, like when I go, I have to make sure I'm recording with the headset, or I'm not recording with the headset. When I'm not recording with the headset, I should be able to speak and there's a mic somewhere